Yeah.
How's your week been?
All
Anything
good.
special going on for you?
Yeah, we had our 3-year anniversary yesterday, Lucy and I. So we
Congratulations.
went on. Mm, Seems more like 10 years, but we got there.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the happy
But,
photo.
yeah, we had like a whole day planned. It went quite weird. Like we got everything done, but like for the first thing was like a spa, with a spa pool and sauna and all that. We thought it'd be like this private romantic thing, and it turned out it was like a shared facility, and it was nudist. There was all these like we had to be naked with all these old people, so to share that with them, and then
Welcome to Eastern Europe, bro.
yeah, I know. She was saying, yeah, that's most of them. And then we went out for dinner, like this fancy, well, supposedly fancy, like mountaintop revolving restaurant thing. And the food there was just rubbish. It was just like so poor quality. Like we could definitely cook better at home, sort of thing. We drove 2 hours to get to this place. It was just kind of hilarious. And then the place was so bad. We're like, oh, let's try and finish on a high note. We'll stop somewhere else for dessert, like somewhere a bit more reliable. So we went to this like another restaurant on the way back, and the dessert there was pretty much terrible. So we're just like, oh, let's just go home. We're done. It's over. Shit.
Some of my best dates were like that. Some of the best dates I remember, they just went absolutely sideways, like get caught in a rainstorm for half an hour. So you're soaked. You can't get more wet if you jumped in a swimming pool, Or one restaurant I went to, the staff was actually mad at me for coming in. Like they didn't want customers. I'm pretty sure it was like a mafia establishment or something. But those ones are the ones that stick with me as experiences that I actually remember and share, with my partner at the time. And something about them, it's just so funny to realize how badly things can go, but that doesn't really have anything to do with how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think, in fact, I think it's better if it's terrible rather than it's just a little bit less than expectations. So, like, if it's awful, it becomes funny. If it's just a little bit off, you're like, oh, that sucked.
Yeah.
So I think awful's better than like slightly disappointing. Yeah, we're both pretty good with that. We've had so many of our expectations crushed in 3 years that we just don't have them anymore, basically. We're just kind of like, if we don't die, it was a good night. So, yeah. It was something. Did you have any topics in mind for tonight?
My week got sort of derailed, actually, which is probably the most interesting topic to talk about. Was, for some reason, it was probably Tuesday after our session. Somehow I managed to injure my back at the gym. I don't even know what I did. I didn't even notice it. Doing some kind of row pulls or something. And went to yoga and felt just a little bit sore, but went through yoga class just fine. It's intense, full effort, as intense as I could. But then around 3-4 o'clock, my whole side, my ribs, my back started to really hurt. They just do this kind of cramping thing where, oh man, the amount of pain was intense. It would just cramp to like at least a scale of, a 10 on my personal pain scale. And then I just had to hold my breath for 15 seconds because I couldn't breathe. And then, it would release and I'd be like, oh, fuck, that was intense. And I'd do that every couple minutes all night long. Getting into bed, getting out of bed, turning over, forget going to the bathroom. It was terrible, and it was really interesting because it's been a while since I've had really intense levels of pain like that. Painkillers don't work on me. at least not normal ones. Probably morphine would, but I don't like doing things that directly affect the brain. So I avoid that kind of stuff. And I was, you know, it's pretty rare that I actually think about going to the hospital, but I was like, maybe I should go find out what's going on. And I actually learned a lot. It was actually a really interesting experience because I had to sit back and watch, like we were talking about last week, System 1 and System 2 parts of the brain. I got to watch the two of them interacting. System 1's getting all this crazy noise signal about pain, right? And it's just going like something's off. I'm feeling a lot here. And System 2 had no idea what did I do? What's actually wrong? I don't remember hurting anything. I didn't pull anything. I haven't been in a car accident. Haven't been in a bar fight. I don't think anybody smashed a chair over me. Can't explain why I'm having this pain. So one of the things I noticed is that System 2 starts searching for reasons. It wants an explanation, right? And it couldn't come up with a good one. So then I start thinking like, you know, cancer? You know, like what's happening?
Yeah.
Am I having a heart attack? And as it had these, and one of the interesting things was that System 2 it's trying to help, but it's not being very helpful most of the time. And sometimes you just had to challenge it and say, okay, well, I'm going to answer your question so that you can let go of it. So for example, one thing was like, where exactly is my appendix located? You know, I needed to look that up because I actually didn't know. And it's not that, can't be that. That's good. That had me worried because I had no explanation for the intensity and suddenness of the pain. And so I just kind of went through it. And it was interesting watching System 2 trying to find a cause. It wanted to know why. And I just had, and I was fine. You know, since I could see that happen, I could just say, sorry, I don't have my best guess is maybe a weekend of dancing, a heavy gym session, and yoga all together just caused some little tweak to become a big inflamed, you know, lower lat or something like that. Maybe I separated some ribs. Maybe it's my old karate injury. I broke 2 ribs on my left side, but that was like 10 years ago. But that's what it felt like again. I was like, did I break them again? How did I do that? Like, you know, craziness, you know. And watching, it was a really interesting situation to just watch when you've got that much noise coming into your brain, this sensation, you know, getting to sort of watch your brain react to it and how its default setting, what it tries to do. Just sort of sit back as the observer and watch that happening was really fascinating.
Yeah, that reminds me of there's a show on Netflix called Afflicted, like a docu-series, and it's about these, I don't know, it's about 6 or 8 people with undiagnosable chronic pain disorders. And it's incredibly interesting to watch because for like 6 out of the 8, you're pretty sure it's not physical, but the symptoms are absolutely physical. So it's like a highly debated kind of topic of medicine. These people believe they're sick so strongly that they're sick, and yet there's no medical equipment on the planet that can identify anything wrong with them other than like the symptoms which are kind of manifesting. And what's interesting is to watch exactly what you're talking about is they started getting some sort of sickness almost invariably after a huge anxiety event. They started getting some symptoms, and then they went online and they found a thing that looked like it, and suddenly they've got that thing and they've got it for life. ME is this kind of disorder for chronic pain, and there's a something mitrofibro, something I can't remember, some big word. And they all believe they've got it. Like one person decided that she was allergic to dust. Another one decided it was bright light and sound that was doing it to him. There was a girl who thought she was allergic to Wi-Fi and electronics, and she had to go to live in this like radio silent place in America where all of the people with this allergy to electronics live together. And it was just like what you were saying, their brains work so hard to come up with a reason that it actually created. The more they researched the illness, the more symptoms they found that they had, they lined up with it, you know? And they were just, I mean, they were fodder for like medical sham artists, you know, like they were paying out the ass for all these pseudo-scientific treatments and stuff. And it's just brutal to watch because you know they're definitely in pain. They're not faking it. There's no way that anyone would purposefully live like that to get attention. It's just too unbearable. Like there was guys who just, like one guy hadn't left his room in 3 years. He just couldn't, and so on. But yeah, it's just amazing. Their brain actually took a few symptoms and turned it into an illness because it just needed a reason for these symptoms to exist in a way, you know? It just, that's what popped into my mind.
Yeah, I found that system one, just for anybody that ends up listening to this, system one is sort of the default emotional brain that just processes sensations and does things on autopilot, responding to things. System two is the rational mind. I found that system one and system two don't like to disagree. Any disagreement that they have, they really try to reconcile. And it goes both directions. Like I've heard of cases, I'm trying to think of a specific one, where someone gets the rational idea that they must be sick. No physical symptoms at all. But then the physical symptoms manifest. Like after they get the idea that I should be injured, I've been in a car accident, I should feel pain, then they start feeling pain for no other reason than they expected.
Absolutely. It's like the reverse of the placebo effect. You know, people get better just because they think they're being medicated. It, you know, for me, it like wakens just the incredible possibilities of the brain that we just know nothing about at this stage. I mean, the brain was ignored for such a long time scientifically. I remember reading about how ancient Egyptians, when they entombed, you know, a body, they'd throw away the brain because they thought it was pointless. They'd like put all the special attention on the heart, where the feelings come from, and the lungs and stuff. They thought wisdom came from the heart or something. But the brain, they just thought it was like a custard to like fill up space. And the brain's been treated like that scientifically. You know, it's only recently that we moved away from like phrenology and all these bullshit things to actually neuroscience and studying the brain. And we're like, we don't know anything. We think we know a lot about the brain, but in terms of like how much we know about the brain, say, to how much we know about the liver and the lungs, not even close. The brain has like barely scratched the surface. Most psychology research is, it's not like it's unscientific, but it's got a long way to go before it matches research on like cardiology or, you know, reflexology or something more medicine. Like brain science is still brand new. And, you know, this actually brings up something I wanted to bring up today. That process of those two systems trying to collaborate or trying to align often comes in the form of storytelling. There's this narrative that kind of tries to make sense of two conflicting things and how they can line up together. I had such a perfect example today. I had a first time with a client, and basically his problem was he'll start something, and then at some point this voice comes in his head saying, I don't really know why I'm doing this. Am I doing it for the right reasons, or am I doing it just to impress people? And he doesn't know. He doesn't know whether he's, you know, outcome dependent or he's authentic. And after this voice kind of comes in, his motivation dives and eventually stops doing the thing. And the funny thing is, like, as we explored it, like, long story short, we came to discover that that story was completely bullshit. What was really happening is he'd get to an uncomfortable level of independence and autonomy. So he'd be doing something to the point where he now has to make decisions for himself, get creative, take risks. And the story would just pop into his head of, I don't know why I'm doing this. And he would believe the story, when a much more accurate description was at a point where he became unable to trust his ability. He would become very emotionally uncomfortable and agitated, and he would be looking for an out, basically, an escape rope. And this story was the perfect out. Like, if I'm not doing this for the right reasons, I shouldn't be doing it. It's a very noble story. It's a story you can sort of go to sleep with, you know, like, oh, I did the right thing. The reason I knew that story didn't work.
I love that example, and it reminds me of something that I went through in my self-development. where there was a point that I was learning what self-responsibility means. And as I approached that point, I got to a similar situation where I began to see stories arising that would attempt to shift my focus away from, do I want this or not, to a different question like, should I have this or not? Or is this right or not? Or would other people approve or not? It would take the context outside of me. It's the best way to describe it. Shifting the response, trying to shift the responsibility to others, or to fate, or to future, or to society, or to whatever. So when I was confronted with a decision, oftentimes the process would start with, do I want this? And then it would de-resolve into, is this okay? What would other people think? You know, what's the long-term consequence, which you can't predict, you know? And it took me a bit of effort to overcome that, to realize like none of that actually matters. The one question I have to answer is this right for me? And that comes down to values. And that took actually some hardcore practice for me to get into the practice of asking and answering questions definitively around my values, and then just going forward. And that was absolutely freeing. But I found it a real struggle.
Yeah,
I really wasn't programmed that way.
Well, that's exactly what this guy's going through, in that he would start a behavior and then ask, why am I doing this? He wouldn't have that established before the action. And when you don't have it established before the action, then any answer can be possible. And if you're scared, your brain will come up with some pretty off-putting answers. You know, and that, what we recognize, I think the thing that was most interesting for me during the call is he went on a bit of a kind of like a narrative, just telling me how he talks to himself. And it was like, why am I doing this? What's the right thing to do? Is this good for me? And I was looking at the way he asked the questions. I was like, it's like he's asking somebody else. The way he phrases questions is the way you phrase it if you're talking to an external person. And I was like, that's the problem. Even if he's talking to himself, what he's really doing is looking for an external answer to occur to him, to be given to him. And that means that whatever answer pops into his head will seem to be like he found it. So when the answer says, oh, you're doing this for the wrong reason, he'll be like, well, that must be the truth. Rather than going, you had no idea why you started doing this. That's your problem. You didn't set like the principle or the value. You waited for it to occur to you, and that's a dangerous practice. And I used to struggle with that. Oh, I still do occasionally, but you don't set the intention before you start.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that absolutely mirrors the experience that I had. Was that before I began practicing responsibility, as I was learning how to practice responsibility, up to that point, I wasn't even aware of the fact that I didn't trust my own judgment. Literally didn't trust my own judgment. Literally didn't think my mind could know enough to decide what's best for me to make my own decisions, that I had to have validation from others. Because I think I'd never been in a place where I'd felt like 100% of the consequence, 100% of the decision was mine to own. And I can see why people would really struggle with that. And the natural result would be confusion, indecision, lack of action, lack of commitment to actions you do actually take, you know. And it was a mess, because I remember.
Think this is.
Go ahead, man.
I was just taking an idea there. This is really important for us to dive into, because it's come up a lot lately. It's been one of those sort of coincidental themes that just keeps popping up, which is a sort of subconscious lack of trust in yourself. You don't have conscious manifestations of it, like thoughts and feelings that say, I don't trust myself. It comes in other forms, but that's absolutely what it is. And this, I think, you know, we've talked about green light syndrome as kind of waiting for a go-ahead signal. It's related to that, where somebody doesn't realize that they don't trust themselves to deal with something, say, unfamiliar. And they don't really know that they don't trust themselves. They just feel this resistance and this kind of what does everybody else think? This kind of thing. You can see it online when people just ask for support and ideas. You're like, shit, you haven't even tried anything by yourself yet. You're going straight to other people without even like having a crack at it. Like you haven't even given some faith in yourself to just have a go. And then when I was talking to my client today, I realized I had a wake-up call when I was in university. When I first went to university, I had signed up to a communications degree. And about 2 weeks in, I had like a sample of all the various beginner papers that we're doing, lectures and stuff. And I just had like this mini crisis. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? And it was this really weird question. I'm like, how did I get here? How am I in university doing this paper right now? Like, I don't recall this decision-making process. I just kind of like, it's like I've been like carried downstream, ended up at this location. And it was this really like rude awakening. Like, it was really hard for me to put into words, but I'd spent my whole life like letting other people guide me because I didn't trust myself to like make a call or something, you know? And it took me a long time. And even then I still lost track of that and kept following that kind of path for quite some time. But I'm seeing this all the time now, this lack of trust leading to this weird decision-making process where you're looking for cues, you know, from the outside world. And I wonder if a lot of people are really unsatisfied because of that and not realize that that's happening.
Well, I mean, I think most people just assume this is the way we are supposed to think, that groupthink is thinking, as an example. That they, you know, a lot of people can't seem to form an opinion on their own. They have to check with their friends first and find out what the consensus is, you know. I've always been a big believer, ever since I started self-development, of the idea that used to exist in native cultures of like the spirit walk, which is that when a kid is around 12 years old or something, you kick them out and you send them into the woods for like 6 months. You're by yourself now. No one is going to validate your decisions for you. It's all you now. And as actually one of the things that I really, really like about New Zealand is the OE culture. You know, both my kids definitely going on an OE for as long as they want, because I found that there's a critical point where you have to learn that what's in your head, that you and what's in your head are the only things that matter in your decision-making process. That's the first line of defense. And then you check in with the world to make sure I'm not impacting anybody, or what's the consequence going to be in terms of how other people will react, perhaps. But the only thing that really matters is what's right for me. When your thinking starts with the group think first, your life isn't your own. You just end up sort of
Well, it spreads through everything.
Yeah. I think you just end up super conflicted between what you want and what other people are telling you. Actually, some of my most conflicted clients are those that come from traditional families, but grew up in New Zealand. Absolute conflict for them. Absolute conflict between how they think they're supposed to be and how they actually feel. They just don't match, and it tortures them.
That's what this guy, he was an interesting case because he said basically his parents divorced at a young age. And I didn't get the full story, but I got the impression that maybe out of guilt or something, they kind of pampered him. Like they did. He said, I've been taken care of. He's in his 20s now, ever since. Even now, they'll support him financially and stuff like that. And there's this kind of sense that, yeah, he's always been provided for. And what we realized as we're talking, there's a subliminal message he needs to be provided for. And it's just created this ripple out effect where he's just kind of waiting for something. And that's like the most he was aware of it. But what we were seeing was, yeah, exactly that. He'd basically been conditioned to wait for somebody else to point the direction or do the thing for him or something in that realm. And had gotten to the point where, well, we realized he was stuck in an impossible situation where he wanted to experience more, in different things, but he was waiting to be more experienced before he started. So he's in that, it's an unsolvable riddle. You can't get more experience without being inexperienced. Or being unfamiliar sort of thing. So he was waiting for an unfamiliar thing to become familiar before he'll do it, which means, of course, he's just doing nothing. And I think we might be talking about something that could be absolutely destroying people. You know, I just thought about it now. Like, how often do people stop and go, why did I choose these clothes to wear? You know? Or why did I buy that house of all houses? Or why do I have this job? And actually figure out the answer to that question. You know, to actually go, well, what was my motivation? What were the factors in my decision making? What was the pattern of decisions that led up to this one? Because when I did that, when I started to like try and trace back to the source, like at what point did I step in and go, I want this? I couldn't find it. I just felt like it was just like path of least resistance. That's all it was. It was like at some point I hit a crossroads. That's hard. That's easy. Go easy. But it wasn't me making that choice in a sense. It was my voice in my head and stuff, but it was just kind of what everybody else thought you're supposed to do, that I had absorbed, you know, as guidance. And yeah, it was distressing for me to realize that.
That's actually a really interesting point. And of course it reminds me of Stoicism, you know, where the motto is, you know, the obstacle is the way, pursue the hard thing. Because people wouldn't do that, obviously, as the easy way out. You do it because you want the challenge. You choose to grow. And the places in my early life where the only places I really knew how to take self-responsibility was around my career and starting my own business. I wanted that. It was scary. You know, of course. I didn't know what was going to happen. Parents totally didn't support it. Like, they're like, no, just get a job as an engineer. But I wanted to. It was just one thing that I was so curious about, so determined to do, that I was actually internally driven in that one area of my life. And I find it interesting that it was so isolated. It didn't affect other areas of my life, like relationships and family and where I live and how I live. The rest of my lifestyle was not affected. That was still very groupthink. But my career is one area. For some reason, there must have been a seed planted very early on that just had a chance to grow, where I got the idea that if I wanted this, I had to go against other people's recommendations and just own it.
Yeah, I think that's where it started for me as well. Well, it wasn't so much career, but like going back to the university example, when I had that little crisis, all on my own, I went to my dean and I said, change all my shit to psychology. Like I made a mistake. Just, is it too late? Because that was the one paper I actually was like, oh, this is good, you know? And that was like, I remember that being a significant moment because it was like the first autonomous decision that I made that was just, I knew the start and the cause and effect of that decision. I'm like, I didn't like that thing, so I changed it. And I hadn't really consciously done that before. But again, it was weird because I was still following the herd in every other area of my life. You know, I'd still go get drunk because everyone was getting drunk, and I'd wear certain clothes because that was a certain style and whatever. I was still just following absolutely the lines of least resistance. But that's one area I think pleasure and pain, you either really want something or you really don't want something, and that's enough to like shift you off the grid for a split second. But I think you might be an exception because I think what we're talking about actually affects people most in the career realm. Like if you had to take a poll, how many people would quit their job if they won $1 billion? The numbers would be staggering. That's how many people really only are working for money. You think, well, how much of that decision-making is autonomous? Like, are you born going, you know what? Money, that's what I need. Or do you learn that, you know? And I absolutely believe that's learned. It's painful to watch these days. So like see someone come home from a job they hate day after day and drag their ass to it day after day, and you're like, dude, you think you're doing this for money, but do you even really know why you're doing it? Like, how much time have you stopped to think about it?
You know, and that's the thing. And I think it might actually circle back to the first discussion we were having about pain and the system one, system two interaction, is that when you see somebody dragging their ass to work every day that they hate, they're really balancing two forms of pain, aren't they? The internal pain of, I really don't enjoy this, I hate this, you know, versus the fear of not having a job, of not having an income, of being socially rejected, of parental disapproval, of the voice in their head saying, man, that's not responsible if you quit your job and pursue your own interests. There's all these other forms of pain that are even more severe for them. And for me, for some reason, the pain of not running my own thing was way worse. I had to do it. Sure, my parents didn't understand. My friends had no clue. My parents literally told me they were sure I was going to fail. I'm like, fuck it, I'm doing it anyway. I'm totally going to do it. Didn't even slow me down. I was all in. I was that committed. I should go back and think about that. What were the factors? Because that was one of the few areas of my life where I didn't even hesitate. I'm just like, there's no other option here. You know, I never doubted the decisions I was making, which was very important, because one of the things I've realized is it's a lot like in martial arts. When you do training, when you're sparring especially, you have to learn not just to get in on the floor and spar someone. You got to learn to drop all of the different things in your mind that are holding you back. You have to learn to give all to that moment, right? And what I find is people, even people that do say start a business, they've managed to quit their job. They've managed to register a company. They're now an entrepreneur, and those are huge things. But they're still so scared. They're still so locked into this place of, I'm going to fail. Everyone thinks I'm going to fail. Somehow I buy into their story. You know, I've got no confidence in this. That even though they've headed down that path, they're not able to put in the effort. They're not able to believe in themselves. And so they're self-sabotaging from day one. There's a part of their brain that just hasn't joined in the fight, right? And that's just not, that's a horrible place to be. It makes me actually depressed when I see people stuck in this internal battle that's just harming themselves. They've got the part that it's like watching somebody bully themselves.
Which is essentially what it is. It's like that voice in your head is usually a critical one, one that sort of just eats away at any certainty you might have had in yourself, any faith you might have had, until there's nothing left. And when there's nothing left, you become very susceptible to instruction. You know, once you don't have any faith in your ability to handle whatever the uncertain future holds, your brain starts just telling you what to do, kind of thing. And it's a weird concept, because it's really like being told by somebody else. You don't know where the voice originates from. You know, you see in like a social world, if you're looking at that girl you're attracted to, and this voice in your head says, don't do it. Like, where did that come from? But people, like, when they're in a place of like no faith in themselves, they don't question where that voice comes from. They just assume they're talking to themselves, that this is just an agreement, where it's really just one part of the brain saying, that feels uncomfortable, let's not. And we take it as a command, but we're so used to taking commands that this is easy for us to follow, you know. And I think that's where it kind of connects is, it's depressing to watch just the sheer prevalence of it. When I look around, I'm like, when somebody's not like that, it's so exceptional. It's so stand out. When somebody's like, hey, just because everyone does something one way doesn't mean you have to do it, and questions and is skeptical. Like, fuck, you're like one in a million, because everybody else just does the way. They might have different ways, but it's still a way that somebody else made up that they're following. You know, there's thousands of different religions, but still anybody who's part of one of them is following that religion's way that they didn't make up. And You know, I think we talked about this before, the kind of positivity movement. That's a huge one. Like you watch a show where somebody's like struggling and the people supporting them will say, come on, just be positive. And it'll be like, okay. And like, where did that message come from? Why can't you just be a bit negative? Like, why we don't even question it? You know, it's become like law, this kind of unwritten law. You've got to be happy, for example. And I think the intimidating thing is that group, their bandwagon fallacy. If you want to think different, you're going to have to go against like everyone you know. And your brain immediately thinks, oh, I can't be right if everyone disagrees with me. You know, and that's so intimidating that you're first like, it's almost rational to go, well, if everyone disagrees with me, it's likely that I'm the one who's wrong. It seems very rational to think that. Yet it's quite irrational because if everyone's in groupthink, most likely conclusion is that they're wrong. Mm. You know, if a huge group of people all think one thing is the right way, odds are it's not. You know, that's kind of the tragedy of humans. But yeah, I remember that. Like, same with starting my business. I can just remember this one time where all my friends were around, and I told them I wanted to do it, and they just morphed into something else. They just became this like negativity. They're just like, no, in this day and age and that type of business, they knew nothing about what they were talking about. They'd be employees their entire lives, never started a business. They knew nothing about coaching. They're all tradesmen. They're like, oh, you know, in this economy, it's too difficult. It's not worth the risk at your age, and you've got a sweet job. I'm just like, shit, I fucking wish I hadn't said anything, you know? And it made me like doubt myself instantly. But they were all wrong, you know? They all ended up starting their own businesses. It's crazy.
You know, there was a great a part of Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman's book, where he was talking about how groupthink, let me explain this, how other people's thoughts add to our own. So basically he was explaining that if you look at our decision making statistically, it's statistical accuracy, first impression versus accuracy of the result. As individuals, we're kind of shit. We're not very accurate. First reaction usually isn't that accurate. If you did a multiple choice test and you gave someone 30 seconds to answer 100 questions, they'd zip through it on first impressions, and they wouldn't do that well. But if you average the answers from, say, 100 people, those answers become far more accurate. Far more accurate, like really noticeably better. But there's a very important caveat, which is that those people basically can't know each other. They cannot come from the same background, the same culture. They cannot think the same way. They have to be absolutely random average people drawn out of, you know, across the world. The moment they're socially or culturally connected, groupthink steps in, and it becomes far less accurate than the individual. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really, really powerful. When I think about what we're doing at BROJO, you know, I think about looking at my own life decisions and looking at talking with guys about what they're dealing with. We work to create this community where they can grow. But the great thing about the community is that everybody's from a different place. They have different preconceptions, different cultures, grew up in different places, different ideas of what a happy life is. And when they have conversations, they often disagree with each other, which I absolutely love. If that ever stops, I'm going to get worried, because that variety of thought is so essential to getting people to actually be able to analyze their own thinking in a helpful context, you know?
Yeah, I remember I was watching, there was some discussion thread for the BROJO, like the members forum, and somebody asked a question and there was people from around the world answering, and they may as well have not had profiles, but just had country flags. Like, here's the American answer to that question, here's the United Kingdom answer to that question, here's the like Eastern European answer. It was just cultural answers, you know. It was just so strong, I could see it. Like, because I'd been to these places and knew a bit about the culture, I was just seeing cultural responses. Because it was just such a subjective question that everyone sort of reverted to, like, what's right around them, what everyone around them would do in this situation was, and I just looked at it and I'm like, well, I've got to be aware of my own one because I've got one. My answers have a flavor that I can't taste. It's like if I come to a decision, even if I think I made this decision myself, no, I didn't. I'm actually heavily, heavily influenced by, it's like a fish in water, by something I'm surrounded by that I can't see, that's surrounded me my whole life. And I think that's that kind of skepticism about your own thoughts, where you're like, just because everyone agrees with me, maybe it's still not right. The interesting thing I had with this guy I had this discussion with this morning, is he would end up quitting something that everyone around him agreed he should quit, and the books he read agreed it was wrong for him, and so on. Yet 3 years later, he still regrets it, and it still keeps him awake at night. I'm like, well, what part of you is creating that regret? If this is the right decision for you, how come you haven't moved on? Where's that coming from? When everybody else says it was all good, you're getting ticks of approval across the field. I don't know. It gives me optimism to know that people still have that voice in them. There's that voice that just goes, nah, this isn't it. But they're so scared of listening to that voice. They don't trust it. And it's, I don't know. I think they're missing out by not listening to that voice. I really do.
Yeah, I'd say that that's definitely the case. And I noticed that your, whatever you want to call it, your inner voice, the true you or whatever, I don't know if there is such a thing, but that kind of the most accurate voice that represents you and your values, that voice will never shut up. Whereas all the other voices, the voices that represent your parents and society and so on, eventually they'll give up. And particularly I see that happen the more I follow my values voice, and I see that that's right. That's the one benefiting me. My life is better day by day by following that. The other voices have to shut up. They've got no case anymore. Like, okay, you're weird. You're different. My advice was based on general society. Clearly that doesn't apply to you. And they just give up.
Yeah, you got to kind of prove them wrong in a sense. They've got to see evidence that your way's a better way. And, my first experience of that, it's hard for me to remember because it wasn't like a single moment in time. It was like a gradual phase I went through. But it was this, I think it came from reading 4 Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss. That was one of the first books I ever read that I was like, whoa, he really doesn't agree with the way everyone does things. It was just like the title of the book says it all. He's saying that working hard long hours isn't a good thing. And I was like, well, I fucking hate it, so I'll have a read of this. If there's another way, I'm open to it. And I was just reading that not only does he make a really good case for why, working yourself to death every day isn't the best way to live. The idea that it's not even the most productive way to live, that actually you can do more with less sort of thing. And I remember I started applying some of the things at work. It just knocked a few hours off each week, but I was still in fact, I was kind of more productive than I'd ever been. I just remember watching this going holy shit, everybody else is fucking wrong. I can't trust anybody. I can't trust anybody now. If this fundamental I've been raised with from birth, that you got to work hard or it doesn't count, if that's wrong, anything could be wrong. Mm. And what I realized is, and I talked about this in the session this morning with the guy, was it wasn't the book that gave me that idea. The book validated a sense that I already had. I already hated working long hours. That was already clearly in me. And then a book said, yeah, me too. And I said, really? Somebody else too? Because I haven't told anyone sort of thing, but this is shit. It was kind of a sense and that's why because the guy I was talking to this morning, he's been trying to find the answers in books. I was like, you don't use books to find the answer. You use books to clarify the answer that you've already got. When you read a passage and it hits you, you're like, that's clarification. When you read something I don't get that, that's not, that's something else. And you just pull these bits and pieces so that your own idea gets refined. And I think that's what I've been doing. Well, you and I have talked about this before. We've both been doing that ever since. Once you discover the word values and what that means, the rest of your life becomes just an exercise in refining that, forever. But the more you refine it, the further away from the herd you get, really, until you're just living in this own little, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I live in my own little universe, like I'm watching everybody else follow a kind of rule book and I've been like cut off from the system sort of thing. It's a weird, sometimes a bit of a lonely feeling. I watch people like if I see people at a pub, all of them smashing back the beers on a Friday, complaining about their jobs, I'm just like, I can't be part of that. Like I can't be in that universe anymore. Like I sympathize with it, but I could never go back. Shit, never.
And that's an interesting battle that I think we all have is definitely, as mammals, we're designed with all the mental mechanisms that drive us to want to be part of a herd. And at the same time, we want personal, individual happiness. So those two are constantly at war with each other. Because on the one hand, if everybody's miserable, I want to be miserable too. And on the other hand, it's like, fuck that. I don't want to be miserable. I want to have my own sense of completeness in life and be the best that I can be. That's a battle that I think everyone ends up facing. And if you look at the few people that have really, really risen to the top, it's their sense of self that has won without exception. And you look at Elon Musk, he doesn't listen to what anybody else thinks. He's got his own ideas. Richard Branson, same thing. What business does he want to start today? No one else is influencing him. These types of people really, they've gone way beyond letting go of nice guy syndrome and people pleasing. They're in a space where they respect society, but society has no effect on them at all. Whereas you look at somebody like Donald Trump, who tweets stuff just to get attention sometimes, like, yeah, he's not there yet. It makes you think. I start to really respect people who've gotten to the place where they're pretty bulletproof as an individual personality. They know what they want. They believe in it. Man, I'm thinking of even like all the explorers have been like that. Lindenberg and yeah, these are guys that are like, yeah, I might die, and yeah, no one understands why I'm doing this, but that's me. I got to know. I'm curious. I'm going to embrace that. Yeah, that's kind of special. And I wonder, how do you develop that? Because the first challenge is letting go of that desire for approval and that desire to be surrounded by people who think the same. Now, one of the things I found really valuable about Brojo is that somehow I do feel like I surround myself with people that think quite similarly, in different places and so on, but I haven't felt less lonely in a long time. I felt a lot more lonely when I was in my, trying to be like everyone, but absolutely miserable. And therefore just couldn't connect on any meaningful level with other people,
Well, I think that initial step, I both sort of work with people around approval seeking and people pleasing, nice guy syndrome. There's a step before dealing with that, which is really just admitting that that's the problem. It's kind of like an addiction or something. And it's actually a really difficult step. It's like being a fish and realizing you're in water. It takes a long time to realize that something's there when it's always been there. Like for me with chronic anxiety, I had chronic anxiety every day, so there was no anxiety. That's who I was, this guy who felt a bit sick all the time. Like that wasn't an abnormal thing for me. It was only when it went away that I was just like, fuck, and that wasn't, like, I didn't realize I had that because there was no comparison. It was just always there. And with people who have been making decisions based on trying to fit in and trying to follow the rules and doing what other people say is the right thing to do, and they've been doing that their whole lives, and they've been strongly, strongly programmed to do that, they may simply not realize they're doing it because the voice in their head sounds like their voice, when really it's just a conglomerate of every other voice they've ever heard. Like, I think a great way to sort of break out of it is just where you just take any random thing you're doing with your life and go, do I know why I'm doing this? And trace it back. Like, When you come up with your first answer, it goes, okay, so what was the cause of that answer? And you go back, like, why am I doing this? Because it's good for money. Okay, why do I think money's good? And straight away, you're starting to get into these like depth questions where you're like, where did I get these beliefs from? Where did I get this idea from? And for me, it was whenever I traced back an idea and I couldn't find like extensive experiments or research of my own. You know, if I came, so like I used to have the conclusion, for example, that you couldn't express attraction to a girl. Everyone around me basically believed it. Everybody lived by it. The people who didn't were actually the catalysts for me. You know, I'd see someone do it. I'm like, how the fuck did he just get away with that? That's supposed to be impossible, you know? And it just sort of like rocked my belief a little bit. And I just remember one day I was like, okay, so where did I get it? Where did I get this idea from? And I couldn't figure out where I got it from, but I knew where I didn't get it from. Like I definitely didn't get it from experimenting 100 times. I definitely didn't get it from any form of scientific research that had been conducted. Wherever I got it from wasn't reliable. It wasn't valid. And that straight away just made me go like maybe I should just try it, you know, like just once, shit. Like, you know, and that was for me, of all the things I've ever done, that was the one that got the most kind of blowback from people I knew. When I told them I was like doing that kind of stuff, they were very critical, mocking. Some people were offended. I was just like, I couldn't find anyone who thought it was a good idea, basically, except for one girl at work. It was like, gosh, she was like my guardian angel, just finally one person saying, yeah, that's a good idea. But then I'd do it, and whoever I, you know, like when I actually did it, it felt good to do it. And I was just like, they're wrong. I just know it. We're all wrong. They don't realize it, but we've all been wrong. And I'm just going to have to do this shit on my own because no one's going to support me here, you know. No one's going to believe me. And that's it. That's the deal.
And that's such a great way to describe it. We should delve more into that somehow, because that to a T describes the sense of self-validation I felt starting my first business. Had no support from a single person. No one believed in me. No one thought it was a good idea. But it felt so right that when I was doing it, I'm like, yep, this, whatever this is that I'm feeling is definitely the right way to go for me. I can't tell you why, but I know that I'm happier, and I didn't know what values were. I didn't even know the word values. But somehow that taking complete responsibility for my own life, for my own future, for my own self-growth, that was, for me, that was the instrumental turning point for me. That the trick was, what's really interesting to me is that I didn't automatically translate that to other areas of my life. I mean, I started my first business when I was 19. That was ages ago, right? But I didn't start applying those principles to relationships, asking, why do I think this form of relationships is right versus this form, you know? I didn't start asking those questions for another 20 years plus.
Yeah, I think it's, well, it might be competency as well. Like, I think for you and I, both in the career space, we found things that we quickly got good at. So I think it's easier to take a risk. You don't need to have faith in yourself as a person. You just have faith in your abilities, which have been proven. There's evidence there that's stronger than the evidence of everybody else kind of being negative. But I didn't have those proven abilities in other areas of my life, health, relationships, self-worth. I didn't have any evidence there to like support the idea that I'd be good at this. There's no like hobby version to like build up some evidence in. And that's why we often talk about like true confidence is doing the thing you don't feel good at doing, not the thing you feel good at doing. Yeah, I think, what was I thinking about before? This kind of, this, how wrong everybody else can be. You know, I saw a really interesting quote, which I can't remember who it was from and how it was phrased, so I'll just misphrase it. But it's not mine. But it was a guy talking about conspiracy theorists. And he says, the true cause of conspiracy theory is not the fear that there's some secret group running the world. It's actually the fear that there isn't one. And that this, what we're seeing is as chaotic as it looks, that no one's really in charge, that this shit's just fucking, everybody's just winging it. And that's like, the conspiracy theory is actually a desperate need to believe in order, that there is a structure, that somebody's got the wheel of this thing. You don't like who's got the wheel, but somebody's got it. And that's why people are so impossible to persuade away from conspiracy theories, because it's not the content of the theory that they're clinging to. It's the belief that something's in control. They don't want to give up that belief because the alternative is terrifying.
Well, I
think that's the case.
That's a really interesting point. I remember reading a study that I should actually look up, which was talking about how people are happier living in a dictatorship than an anarchy. Anarchy scares the crap out of people. The idea that if something goes wrong, they're the only, and this goes back to responsibility, doesn't it? In a dictatorship, I'm not responsible for anything. Someone else is. It's that guy. In an anarchy, I am 100% responsible for me, and I have to trust that everyone else is 100% responsible for themselves. And that feels impossible because we haven't really experienced it.
Well, the funny thing is the idea that you haven't ever been responsible for yourself is an illusion. And I think that was what sort of eased the transition for me, is when I look back at my decisions that I didn't make myself. Actually, I did make them myself. I just blamed it on something else or someone else. So even when I look back with regret and say, oh, I only went to university because my parents wanted it, it's like, well, they didn't tie me up and throw me in there. At some point, there was some decision-making where I took myself to university. I did that every day. They didn't drive me in. I wasn't bundled into the back of a van and had my eyelids stapled over and forced to learn the lecture. Like, that was all choice. It was conditioned and influenced and all the other stuff. I mean, I personally don't believe in free will as it's currently known. But nonetheless, it was my brain making the decision. That's the clear. Don't know which part of my brain, but it was my brain. That thing inside my head that doesn't touch anybody else. And that's when I realized, well, I might as well just harness this then. I might as well do it in a way I like, because I'm going to do it anyway. I can either do it in a way where I'm like, I make the rules, which was, I don't know, for me, it was incredibly freeing. That's actually what I was forgoing to say before about reading 4-Hour Work Week. It wasn't about following his principles that I got excited about. It was about making up my own. I was like, fuck it. There's actually, like, there's laws, and I'm not going to break them. But outside of them, it's kind of fucking free reign. You just do whatever you want. Like, there's a law that says I can't steal money, but there isn't a law that says I have to be an employee. There isn't a law that says I have to dress a certain way when I go to the supermarket. That's all in my head. There isn't a law that says I can't talk to someone I like and initiate a conversation. There isn't a law that says I have to speak when people go silent. That's all made up. And it might be wrong. It might be really, really wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And this is why, I've always been amazed at how much more self-confident and settled and clear people who've done a lot of traveling seem compared to people who haven't. And at first I just thought it was the self-responsibility of getting out and taking a risk and being away and, which I think is part of it. But the more I've looked into it, that course that I did, Shatter Your Echo Chambers, was based on that realization that when I expose myself to a group of people that think very differently from me, go into like a Hare Krishna dinner or something like that, I find that it helps me see the bullshit in my own head, which is like, it's all socially defined, all socially influenced, right? Lets me challenge all of those thoughts that exist that I have never verified or validated on my own. And then I get to see the understandings that are actually mine, that I can actually say, I think this is good because I've tested it, I've experienced it, I've seen the alternatives, I have evidence, right? Versus the stuff that had no evidence, which is something that I'd accepted as hearsay, right? And I didn't have anything to contradict it, so it became part of my worldview. The more I challenge that, the more I put myself around people who think differently, the more open my mind becomes to challenging itself, to challenging the thoughts that pop up. And then when something pops up, like I feel this sense of dread about making a decision and I can't identify the source, that goes away. Because now if I can't identify the source, I immediately tend to call bullshit on it straight away. It's like, well, clearly that's not meaningful. It's just an echo, like a signal, this noise, right? Versus a meaningful, thought that I have to, it's like, I've got nothing there. It gets a weight of 0.
Yeah, I call that a misfire. So my brain goes, anxiety. I'm like, relax, there's no threats. You just popped off too early there. We're good. Just chill. It's funny. Stress is one of those I do it with. I see that, like, I think one of the biggest, like, socially conditioned decision-making things I see is people rushing, like, very, very going as fast as they can to get to the next thing. I'm like, why can't you go slow? Where'd you get the idea that you got to go fast? How are you sure that that's a good thing? You don't seem to be enjoying it. And I think that the reason this has all sort of come up for me, well, partly because the way you started things, but yeah, last night we went for our dinner thing and we went to a main city, and there's just these people stuck in traffic now in Eastern Europe. Well, they like to call it Central, but it's Eastern Europe. They have super, super conservative kind of principles, and like one of those things is everybody goes to work and leaves at the same time. They don't even have like a slight variation on start and finish hours at your standard like employee job. So everybody hits the road the exact same minute. And the place was just gridlocked. If they just staggered start times, at least, it would take you less than 3 hours to get home. But this place wasn't moving. And the cars went as far as your eyes could see. It's starting to snow and get icy. I was just looking at like face after face of that just kind of apathy of someone who's been in this position 100 times before and never once enjoyed it, And I just got this great sense of like gratitude. Like, I remember that, I remember an hour and a half to work and an hour and a half back just because I thought I had to do that kind of job. And just because I thought I had to accept the hours that my boss said and stuff. And
yeah,
like,
I remember that.
I didn't have to.
And actually what's funny is at that point, I had the same situation when I first moved to Chicago, and suddenly I had an hour and a half commute to work. And I was like, after I did it for probably 3 or 4 months. And then I was like, no, I'm done with this. This is miserable. I'm not happy. And I moved, sold my car, which I hated doing. It was a hard thing to do. It was a beautiful 320 horsepower turbocharged sports car. I loved it. I loved driving it, but in traffic, it was just depressing, And then I moved into the center of Chicago, which was freaking expensive. But the advantage was I get 3 hours more life every day, and that's billable time. I can actually go to a client and make money instead of sitting in traffic and just burning life, And I was so much happier. I was immediately happier, which was really interesting to see because it was kind of an experiment. It was like, am I okay trading a higher cost of living, a significantly higher cost of living for more time? I wasn't sure. That's a pretty big trade, right? It's going to cost way more. My cost of living in downtown Chicago approached $10,000 US a month. Not cheap, but the income was supporting it. And having the freedom of time was absolutely, that I felt like my life was mine again. I no longer felt like I was being tortured by myself and by society. It's really interesting when you describe the people sitting in traffic gridlocked and their faces just apathy, like this is normal for them, right? But I really wonder what it would be like if for an individual in that situation, if they couldn't see everyone else experiencing the same thing. My suspicion is if you had one guy there and all the other cars are empty, he'd be pissed off. Like, what the heck is all this traffic here? This makes no sense. Why am I suffering uniquely? But the fact that everyone else there is too, we just immediately go, oh yeah, this is normal. This suffering is okay. In fact, it's expected. If I wasn't suffering, I'm probably cheating somebody.
I mean, what we're talking about now is like the extreme version of it is the concentration camp. You know, everybody else around you is a prisoner who's suffering, so you just settle into like servitude. If you're the only one treated like that, you'd be like, fuck this shit, and you'd take a risk and fight back, you know, and make a break for it. But because everyone around you is suffering, being treated like shit, you just figure, oh, it's fate, you know, and it's not conscious thinking. It's just a kind of a fitting in. And I think you see that, like, someone goes to work, they don't want to put on a suit and tie. They fucking hate it, but they do it, and they get there and everyone else is doing it, and they figure, well, can't be wrong. Instead of going, wait, maybe we're all wrong. And, you know, I think that's the kind of the main theme for me today. It's good to just reflect on and kind of remember that I just lost faith in people's decision making when they get into really large groups, essentially. I don't trust the group. It's like how a single person almost never commits a crime. You know, criminal offenders are a very small percentage of the population. Most people go their whole lives without a mark on their record, a huge majority of people. You put them into a mob and they'll do shit they never even thought of. You know, you put them into a riot and they're stealing, they're beating people to death, they just lose their minds. It's just like a hive mind. They get infected by it. And everyone thinks they wouldn't be like that if they're in the situation, but statistically, yes, you would. Most of you, you know. Most people are really susceptible to the crowd. You know, you see those amazing tests where they get people to sit down, they think they're waiting for the test, but the test's actually begun, and they start getting actors to stand up every time there's a beeping noise, you know, and then everyone else will start standing up because the actors are. And then all the actors leave and the person by themselves is just standing up with the beeping noise. Yeah, it's just so funny to watch. It's just like, don't you stop and think, like, why the fuck am I doing this? But yeah, I think there's a lot of people out there that they know they don't like what they're doing. But it gets like, it goes from like misery crisis, which would actually change you, to just apathy because you see everyone else doing it. You know, you see everyone else like just suffering, and I mean, you can see it like, you know, you and I have talked about like the kind of stereotypical sad married guy, like beaten down and henpecked by his wife, and then he goes and commiserates with all the other husbands, like, oh, be careful, the boss is coming, you know, and they're all like, oh, I had to sleep on the couch last night, so they're all thinking that this is marriage. And then like that one guy who's got like an open relationship or something comes in, he's like, I can't believe you guys put up with this shit. What the fuck? Well, it's marriage, you know? It's like, no, it's you guys as a group. That's all it is. There's no, you didn't sign up for it.
What's even more interesting is that I would suspect in most cases, their first reaction to that guy with the open relationship would be there's something weird about him, something not okay. He's got to be doing something wrong because it's different. My mind tells me
because he's
like
his life.
Yeah.
That's what I got when I started my own business, is how much I enjoyed it. People were suspicious of it. You know, that it was a weird reaction I got. I mean, not everybody, I got to be fair. A lot of people became pretty supportive after I got started, and ironically, it was only people close to me that were kind of holding me back. People on the next level out were kind of really supportive, I guess, because they didn't have a dog in the race. I don't care if I fail, you know. But yeah, it was just interesting. Like, if you go tell people what you do and they're all employees, they think you're lying or something. They're just instantly this kind of, And it's just because you're just not normal, you know. I think we'll wrap it up there, but I really want to finish by saying I saw a video by JP Sears, and I can't remember the whole video, but one of the things he says is, we've never once as a society celebrated someone for being normal, and yet everyone's striving to be it.
Yeah.
You know? We've never once held up someone and go, look how fucking normal they are. Congratulations. Not once have we ever done that.
Yeah.
We celebrate the heroes. And everyone's trying to be normal.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? You know, we revere the people that are different. But I think that the measure of success is essential. One final thing I wanted to add, it was really interesting. You know, you talk about how at first people didn't support you. Most people didn't support you in starting your business. I had the same situation. And what was interesting is if you take my dad in particular, he absolutely tried to convince me not to start my own business. He really thought I was going to fail, but I didn't. I succeeded, and I succeeded ridiculously well. Actually, my first business was, I had no idea what I was doing. Good timing, good partners, good market. I was lucky. And a lot of those things are outside of your control, right? But it did really well. It did so well. Instead of him being happy for me, he was jealous. He envied my success. And he actually told me that one day, that he really envied that success. And I was like, wow, I never wanted that. I want him to be happy for me, you know? I mean, it made no sense. But based on everything we're talking about right now, it absolutely fits. It absolutely fits what we're talking about. Good chat, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely, man. And we'll cut it off there because you and I can just go on forever, but very interesting topic. And yeah, we'll see where that goes. But let's wrap it up there. And
sounds good. See you next week.
Next week it is. Cheers, bro. Catch you later.